So for those of you who don't already know me, my name is Isaac Gagner. I've been a NARG member for a number of years, and I'm currently an undergraduate student out at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology in Rapid City, where I'm actually one of the fossil preparers for our in-house Museum of Geology. And this summer, I had the really phenomenal opportunity to intern at the Mammoth Site of Hot Springs, South Dakota, which is a world-renowned fossil site and museum. And one of my coworkers from this summer, Luke Jackson, who was also an intern, is actually in the audience today. So you guys can bug him too at the end. But I'm going to go over real quick and talk to you guys a little bit about the history and paleontology of the site, what they're doing to make sure it's still an active area of research and it's keeping up to the highest, most modern standards, and a little bit about what work was going on there this past summer. So, oh, how do I change slide? Oh, can I go back? There we go. It's just slow. All right. So a little bit of introduction and background into the area. It is, like I said, located in Hot Springs, South Dakota, which is about 60 miles south of Rapid City. So here on the right is the geological map of the Black Hills. And you can see up here, this is Rapid City in the sort of eastern region. And then right down here is Hot Springs. So that made for a really nice, convenient move for me when I had to move from Rapid down to Hot Springs this summer. And an aerial view of the town. It's a really nice, quaint little town tucked into this beautiful area in the southern Black Hills. And it's still got a lot of the kind of older architecture, which is really fun. And so getting into the history of the site, it started out all the way back in 1974 when a man named Phil Anderson was preparing to develop a plot of land that he owned in Hot Springs. And the process of developing this land was going to require him to level a hill that was on this property. And so when they were starting the process for that, a bulldozer operator named George Hansen struck something with his bulldozer. And he got out and checked it out, and he realized that it was a tusk. And he also noticed several other bones exposed nearby. So he realized that there was something there, and he relayed that information to Phil Anderson, who then proceeded to contact 4 different colleges and universities in South Dakota and in Nebraska, and none of them responded favorably. They were not interested in this find. And so what happened next was then George Hansen, that bulldozer operator, showed the bones to his son, Dan Hansen, who had gone to college at Chadron State University down in Nebraska. Now, Dan Hansen had taken some geology and archaeology classes. So he reached out to his former professor, Dr. Larry Agenbrod, who you see up top here. So Agenbrod went out and took a look at the site, and he recognized from what bones were exposed that there were going to be the remains of multiple mammoths at this site. So he realized something was significant was going on, but at the time he was busy with a bison kill site in Nebraska. So he brought in Dr. Jim Mead, who's down here, and Jim Mead and his colleagues conducted a 10-day excavation at the site in 1974, and they started just finding a real abundance of bones. They realized that there were going to be several skeletons of mammoths in this area. So at this point, Phil Anderson luckily agreed to temporarily halt his construction until the scientists could get a better grasp on what was going on. So then in the following summer, in 1975, they did a full-scale excavation, and they just kept finding stuff. They realized that this was going to be a really significant site. So at this point, Phil Anderson realized that this land was probably more valuable to science than it was to him. So he decided something needs to be done about this. So shortly after that, the Mammoth Site of Hot Springs, South Dakota, Inc., a 501(c) nonprofit organization, was formed. And then Anderson sold his land at cost to this newly formed nonprofit so that the site could be preserved for science. Yeah, that's a bit of a rare instance. So on the left here, this is sort of those early days of excavations in around 75, just out in the air, starting to excavate. And these fossils are pretty fragile. There's a lot of concern about frost thaw, and also it's very difficult to get them out of the ground and to store them and prepare them. And so the idea came to be to make an in situ display. They said, let's build a building over the dig site and continue to excavate and make a museum right here at the dig site. And here you can see that building in the process of being constructed, which is going to lead to the Mammoth Site as we know it today. So here's that building finished in those early days. They're starting out excavation. It's still a little early. We've got these like rope handrails and it's kind of dark. Versus decades later, this is what it's looking like today. So this is after decades, years and years of just continuing to excavate. This is just one very small section of the deposit. This is the deepest part, as far down as we've excavated so far. And you can see those uppermost layers that they were hitting with the bulldozers back in the 1974, all the way down. It's about 25 feet of material that they've excavated through so far. And you can see just an absolute wealth of fossils are showing up. Now, one of the most commonly asked questions we got this summer was, how deep does it go? And the question to that is we actually don't know. We have sort of a guesstimate. So they decided they wanted to figure out how deep it went back in the 70s. And so from those uppermost layers, they drilled a core to see how far down it would go. And the core can only go down 65 feet. That was as far as the drill went. And they found the same material and fragments of fossils all the way down through those 65 feet. They did not hit the bottom. So from those uppermost layers, absolute bare minimum 65 feet further down. And since that discovery in 1974, over 50 years later, we've gone down about 25 feet. So we're less than halfway to the absolute bare minimum depth of the site. So there's just a lot more to be worked on in the future. So then the question becomes, what are all of these mammoths doing in this hill on what was formerly Phil Anderson's land? So interestingly enough, the site actually began as a sinkhole, not a hill. So what happened is you have this spearfish shale, which is the bedrock throughout most of this area, and a sinkhole formed in the Ice Age in this shale. And then a spring from an aquifer fed into that and filled it up and created a pond inside of this sinkhole. Now you've got very steep sides to this pond because it's a sinkhole, and the spearfish shale is very slippery when it's wet. So what happened is mammoths would be attracted either to the water or to the vegetation growing along the side looking for food or water, and they would end up slipping and falling down into the deeper pit. And then of course mammoths are big, heavy, flat feet, not at all adapted to climbing. So they would be unable to escape. They would eventually drown and sink, and their bones would be deposited down at the bottom. And so this is what we call a natural trap deposit, where you have some sort of a natural feature in the environment where animals are getting stuck and accumulating, and you find lots of bodies in one spot. And so then over time, the sediment would fill in this sinkhole with all of these fossils of mammoths, and then the shale around it is actually softer. So over time, erosional processes remove all of that shale and leave behind that sort of plug in the sinkhole as that hill that Phil Anderson was trying to remove. So one of the really interesting things about the Mammoth Site is that it's a very preferential trap. So far, we've discovered remains from an absolute bare minimum of 61 mammoths. A lot of the remains are disarticulated, so the way we come up with that number is by the tusks. We've got lots of tusks, and we figure every mammoth has at most 2 tusks. So you take the number of tusks you found, divided it by 2, that is your minimum number of individuals. Now, while we found all of these mammoths, we have found very few remains of other animals. We're mostly finding just those mammoths. And of those mammoths, if we have a complete dentition, we can estimate the age. So mammoths at any one point in time will have 4 molars in their mouth, 1 in each quadrant, and they'll have 6 sets of molars over the course of their life. And unlike us, where when we replace our teeth, our new teeth grow up from the bottom, for proboscideans, their teeth grow forward from the back, sort of like a conveyor belt. And the tooth that's being used is getting pushed forward and worn down smaller and smaller and pushed further forward into the mouth until it's just a little tiny nub and it just gets spit out. And so by looking at which set of teeth are in their mouth and how worn down they are, we can estimate their age pretty efficiently from very young all the way up into the 60s, which is around the lifespan of these animals. And also, if we have complete pelvises, we can determine the sex of the animal because there are differences in the shape and size of the pelvises between male and female. And so using that data, what we've determined is that the vast majority of the mammoths found at the site were pretty young. They're around 15 to 25 years in age usually, and they're exclusively male. Every pelvis that we found at the site has been the pelvis of a male mammoth. So then the question becomes, what is happening that we're specifically getting usually young male mammoths trapped in this site? And what we think is going on comes down to the behavior. So oftentimes we're using elephants as analogs for behavior for mammoths because they're very closely related. And we know that elephants have what's called a matriarchal herding style. So the herds are led by the elder females, the matriarchs. And when the males reach a certain age, they leave the herd and become solitary animals. So we think that mammoths would have done something similar. And what we're seeing here with these young male mammoths are mammoths that have been solitary, so they don't have the wisdom of the matriarch to help them out, but they're also still young. They don't have that much life experience. And so this is your demographic of mammoths that are most likely to do something stupid, like walk into a sinkhole that you cannot get back out of. So that's why we're seeing that skew in the population. Now, I said that we find very few remains of other animals, but we do find them. We actually have a pretty wide diversity of taxa found at the site, including, these are all of the ones shown on the back wall, the different size of the animals we find. We've got a giant short-faced bear. We've got llamas, coyotes, camels, badgers, pronghorns, coyotes. We've even got a little mink, which is cool, and a prairie dog, and a couple of species of birds. And of these, of course, the most charismatic and the one that we end up talking to visitors the most about is that giant short-faced bear. If you guys aren't familiar with, the species on that is Arctodus simus. It is the second largest bear to ever live. There was one species in South America that got slightly larger. But these guys you can see over here stand about 6 feet tall on all fours. They're larger even than modern polar bears. And they're so large, we like to say that if it stood up on its hind legs, this bear would have been able to look into a second-story window. So these guys were pretty intimidating predators. Now, for the most part, with all of these other animals, we're not finding complete articulated skeletons of the mammoth site. We're not finding good remains. We're finding mostly partial fragments that are disarticulated. So what we think is that most of these guys were not getting stuck in the sinkhole the way that the mammoths were. For a lot of these animals, probably they died in the area somewhere outside of the sinkhole, and then heavy rains would wash their carcass into the sinkhole after it had already started to decompose and be scavenged and things like that. So as far as the age of the site, our understanding of that has changed over time a little bit. Initially, they attempted to radiocarbon date the site, and that gave them a number at around 26,000 years old. And initially, they thought that it accumulated fairly quickly. But later, optically stimulated luminescence dating was used, and that gave us much more accurate dates. The uppermost layers are around 140,000 years old, and the lowest currently exposed layers are down around 190,000 years old. So chances are none of the mammoths preserved at the site ever overlapped with each other. They accumulated very slowly over this around 50,000 year time period.
But about 50 mammoths in 60,000 years.
It's about 60 mammoths in 50,000 years, yeah. So now there's some interesting taphonomy stuff going on the site that I want to talk about. For one, there's some really unusual preservation. So the fossils of the mammoth site are not permineralized. They haven't been replaced with outside minerals the way that we typically see in fossils. But they don't have any of the organic material remaining, so we don't get DNA from them. That's another one of the top questions that people always ask. So what happens, I'm not sure, not that we've found so far. So what we understand is that as these mammoths were decaying in this hot water, all of the organic material gets leached out of the bones, and what's left is just the original mineral content of the bones themselves from when the animal was alive, all of that hydroxyapatite, that kind of stuff. So the result of that is that the fossils are not very dense, which is interesting. Like when we actually handle them, it's really like astounding how light the fossils are. They're not like you'd expect those really heavy bones that we're usually handling. But it does make them really incredibly fragile. So we are always consolidating these fossils to stop them from degrading. Another really cool taphonomy thing, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about the site, is that we have kind of this weird disarticulation pattern that pops up a lot with the mammoths. So over here on the left, this is one of the most complete skeletons that we have at the site. It is called Murray. And if you look up here, this is the scapula, the right shoulder blade of Murray. And his right arm is there in place, but you can't see it. It's behind this pedestal. He's got a very complete vertebral column, actually starting at his cervical vertebra, so the vertebra in the neck, and then leading all the way down his spine to his pelvis, and even his tail is there. He's got his full rib cage, very complete pelvis, and we've got both back legs. Here's femur, tibia, fibula, femur, tibia, fibula. The only thing that's missing on Murray is his head. And that's actually why he's called Murray. Originally, they found this mammoth and it was headless, so they called it Marie Antoinette. But then they discovered it was male, and so they changed the name to Murray Antoinette. So then we've got Murray over here. And then if we take a look, same area of the pit, but just a little bit to the left, you can actually still see Murray's skeleton here. If you look over here, this is a skull that is not associated with the body. And right over here is another skull that's not associated with the body. So keep that in mind. We've got a very good skeleton, but with no skull. And we've got skulls with no skeleton. And then if we come back and take another look at this deep area of the pit that I showed you earlier, look up here. Here's the skull with no body, no skeleton. Here's another skull with no body. Come over here. There's another skull with no body. Here's another skull, another skull, another skull. So this is something that we're finding a lot. We're finding skeletons without heads. We're finding heads without bodies. Sometimes we find very articulated, complete ones like this one down here. But a lot of times it seems to be a pattern of the head is somewhere else. So the question becomes, what is consistently separating the skulls from the bodies on these mammoths? And for that, we have to think about the specifics of the bones. So if we take a look, this is an African elephant skull that's in our modern comparative collections. And this shows something that's really important about the skulls of proboscideans, of all of the elephant relatives. So this piece over here is a section that was cut out of the back of the skull on the other side. And you'll see this kind of honeycomb structure. It makes a lot of empty space. There's a lot of empty air cavities, sinuses, spaces in the skull of elephants and mammoths. And the reason they do that is to help make their skulls lighter. If you've got a really big head and really big heavy tusks, you want to do anything you can to make your head lighter because it's very hard to hold it up. You need a lot of extra musculature. But if you take a mammoth's carcass and you throw it into water, what's going to happen? As the body begins to decompose, gases are going to build up in all of that empty space in the skull, and it's going to make the skull buoyant. And then as the body continues to decompose, all of the muscles and ligaments and tendons in the neck rot away, and at some point, the skull just pops off and floats up to the surface. And the skulls will float around and bob around at the surface until that gas can escape, until water can get into those empty spaces, and the skulls are going to sink back down to the bottom. So it's kind of morbid. We like to tell visitors to it's kind of like marshmallows bobbing in hot chocolate over the top, but with mammoth skulls. So this is just all of the kind of stuff that we have to keep in mind, even all of these post-mortem processes that go into shaping what we see today when we're looking at these fossils. So, of course, there's been a lot of research going on at the site over the many, many decades of it being worked on. And there's not nearly enough time to go over even a piece of it. So I thought for tonight, I was going to just focus in and show you guys a really interesting, this is one of the most recent pieces of research to come out of the site, which was actually the first ever preservation of quote unquote predigit structure in extinct proboscideans. So the predigit, as it's called, is a really unique structure that we see in modern elephants. And this is what they do is they take these cartilaginous structures and they partially ossify them. So they somewhat turn to bone, but not quite fully all the way. And it sort of forms this fake sixth digit, like a sixth finger, that kind of points backwards into the fat pad to bear weight. So you can see it highlighted in white on these diagrams. And for a long time, we figured that extinct elephant relatives would have a similar structure, but we've never seen it before because it's not something that tends to fossilize very well. But of course, the preservation here at the Mammoth Site is super, super good. And so they actually did discover one, and it was just published this summer. So that was a super exciting find, and just another sort of feather in the cap for research at the Mammoth Site. So moving on, now that you guys have seen a little bit of the stuff going on at the site itself, obviously the site is a really, really incredible deposit on its own, but you can always learn more when you work in connection with and compile data from numerous different sites. And so the Mammoth Site of Hot Springs as an organization strives not just to understand our site, but to understand the Ice Age as a whole and to look for new insights into understanding climate change and evolution into the Holocene. So I took this little snippet from the official mission statement, and after talking about the goals for the site itself, it talks about developing a broad understanding of the late Ice Age record across a global framework. So the researchers of the site are often working in connection with lots of other sites across the world. So I wanted to show some of the work that's going on with those with you guys, starting up with Parker's Pit. So Parker's Pit is a blind pit natural trap on Wind Cave National Park property. It's not part of Wind Cave itself, but it's just on their property. And when I say that it's a blind pit natural trap, so natural trap, we mentioned that, that's where animals are naturally dying and accumulating in one spot. So a blind pit, we have like a cavern system, and there's a sudden drop off with no warning inside of the cave. And so animals in the dark, they can't see, they don't know this pit is coming. They're walking around, they plummet to their death, and these bodies are accumulating in this pit, and it builds up this really, really fossil-rich sediment. And so that's exactly what's going on here. We think that this site is recording some fauna from around 14,000 years ago, and we think that it may be accumulated over the course of a couple thousand years. And so over the past several years, the Mammoth Site has gone out there, collected the sediment from the site, we've washed it, screened it, and then we go through and we pick that sediment, and we've been finding a wealth of specimens. And we've got actually a number of publications that are currently in the work that are not out yet. This is a really big focus of the active research being done right now. And we'll come back and talk about this a little more later. But moving on, we've got the Snake River Bison Site, which is a river site in Minnesota that has an abundance of subfossil bison bones. So these bisons are about 4,000 years ago. They're not technically fossils yet, but we do think that they're going to have some important insights for us into bison evolution. And so the Mammoth Site organized a really big collection of the specimens from the site, and we've currently got those housed in our collections and are working on doing research on them. So on the left over here, this is a really nice skull and lower jaw from one of those bisons. And one of our interns, Zach, spent a lot of the summer working on those specimens. So he was constantly surrounded by them. All of these darker bones on the left, those are the Snake River bison. And then behind him, he's got modern bison bones for comparison. Another really, really cool one is the Channel Islands. So the Channel Islands off of the coast of California, this is where they find pygmy mammoths. So there's a population of, we think, Columbian mammoths that got isolated and trapped on these Channel Islands. And over time, there's low resources on the island. They evolved to be much smaller, and they turned into a different species that we call Mammothus exilis. And this is a really, really classic example of that island dwarfism phenomenon. And so back in 1994, they discovered a specimen called Mr. Mammoth, which was the first ever virtually complete skeleton of one of these pygmy mammoths. And the parks workers at Santa Rosa were a little bit in over their head when they found that. So they reached out to Larry Agenbrod and Jim Mead from the Mammoth Site because they knew that these guys know mammoths. And they brought them over there. And so the researchers from Mammoth Site aided in the excavation and studying of that specimen. And they continued to work jointly with the Channel Islands for actually over 20 years after that. And really cool, this guy, Mr. Mammoth, he was only 6 feet tall, which is pretty short for mammoth, and he was 54 years old. This was an old male mammoth. And this is a picture of the excavation back in the 90s. And today, we have a really phenomenal cast of Mr. Mammoth on display at the Mammoth Site. So moving into the summer work from this past summer of 2025, I was one of the 14 interns that were hired for the summer season. It was a big crew. Here you can see all of us posing in front of the life reconstruction. And we're doing all kinds of stuff. We're constantly moving around doing different tasks across the museum. So I've got a whole laundry list of all of the different things we're working on, and we'll go ahead and go through them one by one and talk about them a bit more. So starting off with the really exciting, everybody always wants to know about excavation. Now we're actually not doing a whole lot of excavation these days. We still are doing some, but it has slowed down a lot since those early days. We have other focuses that we'll talk about in a second. So we're working mostly this summer on excavating in this chunk of the pit where we really haven't found very many fossils so far. We're hoping that as we continue to get down lower in elevation, we'll start to find more. But of course, we have to dig very slowly to make sure that we don't accidentally damage anything if we do run into something. So not the most exciting field season as far as finding things. Over the past summer, all of the interns excavating there, we found one bone found by yours truly. So that was an exciting one for me. But you can see in this picture on the left, Kai and I, right after discovering it, and here's Kai working on starting to expose that little tiny bone about this big. We think it's one of the epiphysis, one of the end plates from one singular tail vertebra. So pretty exciting stuff. Uh, and now the reason that we're not doing a whole lot of excavation is because our main focus inside of the bone bed right now is on conservation. And specifically, our main project is on removing glyptol. So back in the early days of excavation in the 70s and 80s, they heavily consolidated the bones with a chemical called glyptol. Now, there's a few problems with glyptols that they weren't aware of at the time. For one, it doesn't penetrate down into the bones. It only coats the surface. And so the bones that were consolidated with glyptol are still at risk of the interior of the bone degrading over time. And then the other problem with it is that it off-colors over time. So you'll see on a lot of the bones from the site, you'll see this kind of like darker brown color. That is not the color of the bones. That is just the color of the glyptol that's coating the bones. Underneath that glyptol, the bones are still white because, like I said, they haven't been replaced. So they still have that original white color. So one of the things we're working on is going through and very painstakingly trying to remove that old glyptol and replace it with paraloid B72. So on the left, you can see me working on the ventral side of a Columbian mammoth skull that has seen better days. And then on the right over here, Jack is also working on removing glyptol from a skull. That's kind of our main focus right now. We want to start with the skulls and then move on to other things. And it is a very, very slow and careful and painstaking process. So here's a little before and after for you guys. This is my skull when I started on it, and you can see that dark brown color on these teeth. The teeth are the highest priority for us right now because we're doing so much research on them. And so what we do is we apply a solvent that we mix in-house. It's a mixture of a whole bunch of different chemicals. And we let that sit on there for about 20 minutes, and that'll help sort of soften and lift up that glyptol. And then we can get in there and carefully start scraping and scrubbing it off. And after a couple of days of tedious work, really kind of like crouched down in that tight spot in the bone bed, here you can see those teeth. That white is starting to shine through again on those pearly whites. Sure. I think there is a little bit of toluene in the solvent. I don't remember the exact formula. Yeah. um, but yeah, so then moving out of the bone bed and into the lab, we had a lot of preparation work going on. There's not a whole lot of collection of specimens going on currently, but there's still a ton of preparation work that has to be done on specimens that were collected in the past. So stuff like matrix removal, specimen repair, and rehousing were all pretty much constantly underway in the labs. So up top, one of our interns, Ashley, is working on repairing a vertebra from a mammoth. And then here is Luke working on repairing a rib. And then once those specimens are repaired and prepared, they can be rehoused, and then that goes straight into the collection management side of things. So as you guys are probably aware, it's always a constant effort going on to make sure that these collections are going to be a stable resource that's available for decades and centuries into the future for research. We always have to go in and make sure that everything is to the highest standards of archival housing and all of the data is being preserved. So we're doing a lot of that work, updating the housing inside of the collections. So here I am on the left, working on making an archival cavity mount for a small foot bone. And then on the right, this is a completed cavity mount that I made for a much larger axis vertebra. And then once those are rehoused, they head down into collections. And we are also working very carefully in the collections to make sure that we are updating our inventories, making sure that we know exactly where every single specimen is, what it is, What needs to be done with it? Does it need to be rehoused? Does it need to be prepared? What's the condition of it? Is it stable? All of these things, making sure all of that information is correct and up to date. Because if any of you guys have ever spent much time in collections that have been around for a long time, you know that problems tend to accumulate. You always have to go back and correct something that, you know, is maybe not the best that was done 30 years ago. Always, always. And that applies not just to all of the big mammoth bones, like the ones that I'm inventorying in that compactor there on the left, but also all of the microfossils. So here's one of the interns, Jack, and he's working on inventorying all of the microfossils. He's got a little bit of a rabbit jaw that he's holding right there. We also had a few big rehousing projects going on this summer. So this was a really cool one. They rehoused the skull of the youngest mammoth so far found at the site, Bo, who we estimate is around 12 to 15 years old. And on the left, that's in the process of making the archival cradle. So that fossil is there in the sandbox underneath all those trash bags and sandbags that are holding that down and making sure that the fiberglass and the plaster conform exactly to the shape of the fossil. And then this is what it looks like completed, flipped over. And then once both sides of that cradle are constructed, it's time to wheel it into the collections room and place it into the compactors where it is going to be stored long term. And then another fun, big rehousing project that I would share with you guys is I mentioned our intern, Zach, who is working a lot on the Snake River bison. He made a really phenomenal jacket for one of the very nice skulls from that site. And I wanted to show you a little bit of the unglamorous side that you guys don't get to see as much, the level of dedication that goes into this kind of work. This is a pose that Ashley and I watched Zach hold for a really astounding long amount of time while he was working on this skull in order to be able to reach into where he needed it in that sandbox in order to make that. I don't know how his back survived, but he did a phenomenal job, and the outcome was really great. So we're also doing a lot of micro picking. So that sediment from Parker's Pit that I mentioned earlier, we spent a lot of time going through that under the microscope with tweezers, finding all kinds of little tiny fossils, sorting them out and categorizing them so that they can go into all of those research publications that are underway. So these are some highlights of stuff that I was finding. Down here, these are some of the largest bones that we were finding. By that I mean they're about this big, little tiny. So this probably came from a larger rodent, something like a groundhog or a prairie dog. And then up in the right, it's a really nice, very complete shrew jaw with all of the teeth in it. And then down in the bottom, this is the upper jaw or maxilla of a rodent with one molar still in it. We're also finding stuff from snakes, frogs, snails, all kinds of stuff. So that was always a blast. And then moving on, we did a lot of education and outreach. The Mammoth Site is really big on trying to teach the public about paleontology. So we as the interns actually taught educational classes that were offered to the public. And so those included classes on excavation. We have sort of this simulated dig bed set up with replica fossils in it. And we teach people about the tools and techniques and methods that we use to find and collect the fossils. And we also have replicas that we use to teach people about morphology and anatomy, how we identify the bones and what they can tell us about the animal. And we tell people that we definitely don't do that with the real fossils, holding that tibia out. We also taught classes about plaster casting and making replicas. So here is Mac with an entire batch of replica mammoth teeth that one of her classes made. And then my absolute favorite class that we got to teach this summer was atlatl throwing. So here's a picture of me throwing dart. If you guys don't know, an atlatl is a type of primitive spear thrower that is actually the oldest projectile weapon used by humanity and something that we have evidence of humans using to hunt megafauna in the Ice Age. So we would teach people about this tool, how to use it, let them practice, and we'd also teach them about what paleontology and archaeology tell us about the early hunting behaviors of humans and the interactions between humans and megafauna in the Ice Age. So that'll go ahead and wrap it up. Here is credits for images other than the ones that were mostly taken by me. These are some of my sources if you guys want to go ahead and fact check me. And then I'll open it up to questions.
Hi, Isaac. This is Jerry here.
What?
What was that?
This is Jerry, online. Can you, I,
I
am I,
we can
am I heard?
yeah.
I got to, I was looking forward to your presentation. I was glad I didn't miss it last month because that's when I thought it was. I got to spend a week there, back in 2014 and, doing all sorts of things. And we actually got into the pit and, I actually found a couple of little teeny tiny snails. I was the only one who found anything that week. And supposedly they're now in the database somewhere, but they're very, very tiny. And I was going to ask you if you know that I was there before they did the expansion, and now they have the big plaza out front. They have a new theater, and we have NARG has a brick on the plaza, and I was wondering if you happened to see the NARG brick.
I looked for the NARG brick. I was not able to find it. They have a lot of bricks of
I know.
donors, and I think there are some that they said that have not been put up yet since they had to take them down to do some renovation. So it might be amongst those.
I just figured I wanted to find out if anybody's seen the NARG brick.
Are you going back?
Um, Probably not this summer because I have to do field camp for my degree that I know they cannot work around that. But maybe the following summer we'll see what the future holds.
Any, any data on how so many mammoths ended up at one hillside?
Yeah, so the mammoths were getting trapped in a sinkhole, and so that's why it's such a localized area, is that this deposit is the sediment that infilled this one sinkhole. Yeah.
So basically, one of them died about every 1,000 years.
On average, yeah.
Been died once.
Yeah, no. These were very likely that none of them overlapped in time, since there's such a wide spread of time. But yeah, we average around one mammoth per 1,000 years of sediment exposed. Although the actual like nature and how they accumulated it is sort of a question that's still up for research. I know that Daniel Fisher at the University of Michigan was doing some research. He believed that they were more likely to fall into the sinkhole during certain seasons, depending on weather conditions, and that can vary on larger cycles. So it might have been there'd be several thousand years in which mammoths weren't falling in, and then maybe you'd have 1,000 years where several mammoths fall in. So
Yeah.
there's still work to be done there. Yeah.
They typically pay you to work there.
Oh, yeah. So actually, the internship for next summer is open right now. So if you guys want to like take a look at the details on that, that's online. The pay is $12 an hour, but they do provide housing on site for the entire summer for free, which is pretty nice.
What are the housing lines?
The housing, I mean, it was nice. I mean, I won't say down on anything free. Yeah, it was sort of a dorm style. So what we had was this one sort of double wide like trailer house that consisted of 7 rooms, and it was two interns per bedroom, and then one shared bedroom and one shared kitchen and a shared laundry room. Um, so. It's really nice if you have a good group, which I think we definitely did. I know Luke and I had a lot of fun just kind of hanging out with everybody this summer. But you got to be pretty friendly because you're in a pretty small space with a lot of people.
It's almost entirely college age.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a requirement to be enrolled in college, but they take both undergrads and grad students. So there was kind of a spread on the age a little bit.
Do they need to be in the field?
They need to be in a quote unquote related field, but they're pretty lax on that. If you can argue that it's related, then you can get by. They've had people from a variety of majors, mostly geology and paleontology majors, but I think they've had a couple of like chemical engineers and a few other things. Yeah.
So the Snake River bison,
Mhm.
are they, have you got them down to species? Are they occidentalis or bison?
So that's something that they've been working on. That's one of the big questions is what species are they? Because they seem to kind of they've had a hard time placing them, whether they're bison or bison antiquus, is my understanding. And so they think that there could be hybridization there, or maybe this is a kind of intermediate step in the evolution between those two species that we haven't seen before. And so those are kind of some of the big questions that they're hoping that research going forward will answer.
They find quite a few out there. Where exactly else in River is it?
Oh, I don't remember exactly where. Yeah, it is in Minnesota.
River, Minnesota.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's named.
It could be.
But
the in situ bones, aren't they gonna leave them there? Are they gonna get pulled out? Because you have a huge accumulation. Is the eventual goal to take them all out?
So the goal right now at this moment is to conserve things in situ as much as possible right at this moment. Potentially in the future, there might be more collection and trying to excavate further. But right now we have so many specimens already exposed. They're great for education. There's still a lot of research that can be done on these while they're still in situ. So they don't want to remove them just yet for those reasons. The other issue becomes storage. We have a fairly small collections, if you could see from those few pictures, and a mammoth is really big. Trying to store a mammoth skeleton is pretty phenomenally difficult. So unless there's some point in the future when there's a large influx of money to build a much larger collections area, not much can be done as far as removing skeletons out of the bone bed.
Do you keep track of not you personally, you have information on how many visitors they get a year through there?
Oh, they definitely have those info. I don't know it off the top of my head. It's quite a lot. I know that this summer was a very sparse year, actually, just for tourism in the Black Hills in general. There was a really sharp decline from the previous summer, but it's quite a lot of people that go through there.
I imagine having situ just creates an environment that it's pretty neat to see it. You don't see it like that very often, so I would imagine it attract a lot of people interested in seeing these.
Yeah, it does. And it's in a very good area in the Black Hills. I mean, people are passing through trying to get to Mount Rushmore or the Sturgis Bike Rally in the summer, and so those attract some pretty big crowds. Yeah.
Why the original dating so far off?
Yeah, that is because the site is too old to reliably carbon date. So they tried to radiocarbon date it mostly because Larry Agenbrod believed that it was going to be much younger. They suspected that it was in the age range where carbon dating would be effective, which is less than 50,000 years old. But if you have anything older than about 50,000 years old, you're very, very unlikely to get any sort of reliable date from carbon dating.
According to ChatGPT, there was 100,000 people that went through the site.
Yeah.
I don't know. What about the compares to the national monuments? We get it equal or a similar visitation, right?
That's a good question.
It's the visitation promoting in depth last year.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.